The Nexus Combat Academy floated in the void between three star systems, a testament to galactic cooperation and barely contained xenophobia. Oh, what a marvelous contradiction it was, thousands of species coming together to learn the fine art of organized violence while maintaining their precious prejudices like family heirlooms. The Academy's crystalline spires twisted through space, each section designed to accommodate different atmospheric requirements, gravity preferences, and the occasional need to keep certain species from eating each other during lunch break. Founded after the Third Galactic Conflict, which historians diplomatically called a cultural misunderstanding rather than the genocidal mess it actually was, the Academy served as both military training ground and sociological experiment. Could natural enemies learn to fight alongside each other instead of merely fighting each other? The jury was still out, but at least the cafeteria fights had become more creative. The Academy's hierarchy system was elegantly simple, much like a sledgehammer. Species were classified from A through D based on their combat effectiveness quotient, a scientific-sounding term that essentially meant how quickly can they turn other beings into paste. Class A species included the Zephyrians, whose crystalline exoskeletons could deflect plasma fire, and the Vorthak, whose 6 arms made them living weapons platforms. Class B housed the psychic species and energy manipulators. Class C contained the moderately dangerous but manageable races. And then there was Class D. Class D was where they put species considered support personnel, a polite way of saying too fragile for real combat, but useful for carrying supplies and fixing broken equipment. The Quilnari with their excellent mathematical abilities. The Phoenix with their extraordinary sensory capabilities. And, of course, humans. Humans. Those bipedal curiosities from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. When humanity finally developed faster-than-light travel and knocked on the galaxy's door, the established powers had greeted them with the sort of condescending patience usually reserved for children showing off crayon drawings. Humans were small by galactic standards, weak by military metrics, and possessed no natural armor, venom, psychic abilities, or energy manipulation capabilities. They were basically mobile meat sacks with delusions of adequacy. Which made it all the more amusing that Zara Hendricks had somehow ended up in the Academy's Advanced Combat Program. Zara possessed the distinctly human trait of looking absolutely unremarkable until you paid attention. Average height for her species, brown hair that refused to maintain military regulation no matter how much gel she applied, and the kind of lean build that suggested regular exercise rather than genetic enhancement. Her most notable feature was perhaps her eyes, a shade of green that seemed to catalog everything while revealing nothing. The fact that she had been admitted to advanced combat training was, according to Academy gossip, either a bureaucratic error or some sort of elaborate practical joke. Humans simply did not belong in advanced combat programs. Everyone knew this. The instructors knew this. The other students knew this. Even the cleaning drones seemed to know this, given how they always seemed to malfunction around her training sessions. But here she was, sitting in advanced tactical combat theory, taking notes with the same methodical precision she applied to everything else, while Professor Greetal explained the 17 different ways to kill someone with a plasma blade. Around her, various alien species shifted uncomfortably, as if her very presence was somehow offensive to the natural order. Which, to be fair, it kind of was. The Academy's social structure mirrored its classification system with mathematical precision. A-class species socialized with other A-class species, B-class with B-class, and so on. Cross-class interaction was discouraged, not through official policy, but through the sort of unspoken understanding that kept the galaxy functioning. Predators didn't befriend prey. Apex warriors didn't associate with support staff. And nobody, absolutely nobody, took humans seriously as combatants. This social dynamic had created a perfect environment for what could charitably be called character-building experiences, and more accurately described as systematic harassment. The fact that Zara endured these experiences with stoic silence only seemed to encourage them. Korath the Bone Crusher. And yes, that was actually his official Academy designation, because subtlety was apparently not a Zephyrian virtue, had appointed himself as Zara's primary tormentor. Standing nearly 8 feet tall with a crystalline hide that could deflect small arms fire, Korath possessed the intellectual depth of a particularly dim asteroid and the personality of a malfunctioning waste disposal unit. He had earned his fearsome reputation by crushing training dummies with his bare hands, a feat that impressed exactly no one who understood that training dummies were specifically designed to be destroyed. His companions in Harassment were equally distinguished in their mediocrity. HFY belonged to the Nexus Collective, a hive mind species that communicated through psychic resonance and possessed the charming habit of projecting their thoughts directly into other beings' minds. Unfortunately for everyone involved, HFY's thoughts were usually variations on "look how superior I am," with occasional breaks for "humans smell funny." The third member of this intellectual powerhouse was Thimal, a crystalline being from the resonance worlds who could manipulate energy fields with the same ease that humans manipulated disappointment. Thimal glowed with an inner light that pulsed in rhythm with their emotional state, which meant everyone always knew exactly how smug they were feeling at any given moment. Together, this trio represented the absolute pinnacle of Academy combat training, the cream of the galactic military crop, the future leaders of interstellar warfare. They also possessed the collective wisdom of a broken hyperdrive and the emotional maturity of particularly vindictive children. Their campaign against Zara had started small, replaced meal packets, mysteriously malfunctioning equipment, training schedules that somehow never included her actual assigned times. When she failed to react with the appropriate level of distress, they escalated to more direct approaches. Shoulder checks in corridors, accidental equipment failures during dangerous exercises, and the sort of casual verbal abuse that suggested they had attended the Galactic Academy of Creative Insults. Through it all, Zara maintained the same calm demeanor, completing her assignments with mechanical precision, while her tormentors grew increasingly frustrated with her lack of response. It was as if she existed in her own private universe where their actions were merely background noise, interesting but ultimately irrelevant. This, of course, drove them absolutely insane. Faculty response to the situation ranged from willful blindness to active encouragement. After all, if a human couldn't handle a little rough treatment, what business did she have in combat training? The galaxy was a dangerous place, full of species that would show no mercy to the weak. Better she learned this lesson in the relative safety of the academy than face it in actual combat. The logic was flawless, assuming you ignored basic concepts like fairness, due process, and the novel idea that might not always make right. But logic had never been the academy's strongest subject. The breaking point came on a Tuesday, or what passed for Tuesday in a space station that existed in perpetual artificial time. Zara had just finished a particularly grueling session in the zero-gravity combat simulator, a hellish device designed to prepare students for fighting in the vacuum of space. She had performed adequately, which in academy terms meant she hadn't died horribly or embarrassed herself beyond repair. Korath, HFY, and Thimal had been watching from the observation deck, their expressions suggesting they had finally reached the limits of their patience with her continued existence. As she made her way to the equipment storage area, they followed with the predatory grace of apex hunters stalking wounded prey. The storage area was conveniently located in one of the academy's older sections, where surveillance equipment had a tendency to malfunction and instructors rarely ventured. It was a perfect place for an educational encounter between superior beings and their inferior counterpart. Well, Korath rumbled, his voice carrying the subtle menace of grinding tectonic plates. Look what we have, eh? The little human playing soldier. Zara continued stowing her equipment with methodical precision, apparently unaware that 3 of the academy's most dangerous students had cornered her in an isolated area. This level of obliviousness would have been impressive if it weren't so obviously suicidal. We've been watching you, HFY added, their psychic voice echoing directly in Zara's mind with all the subtlety of a plasma cannon. Watching you pretend to belong here. It's quite amusing, really. Thimal's inner light pulsed with malicious satisfaction. The instructors talk about you, you know. They place bets on how long before you wash out. The over-under is currently 3 more weeks. Finally, Zara turned to face them, her expression as neutral as a diplomatic treaty. Gentlemen, she said, her voice carrying the sort of polite disinterest usually reserved for tax auditors. Is there something I can help you with? The casual dismissal in her tone struck them like a physical blow. Here they were, the Academy's elite warriors, and she was treating them like minor inconveniences. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. Help us. Korath stepped closer, his massive frame casting a shadow that would have terrified most beings. You can help us by acknowledging what you are. Your prey, human. A weak little creature that somehow wandered into a predator's den. We're here to remind you of your place in the natural order. The natural order, Zara repeated thoughtfully, as if testing the phrase for flavor. How fascinating. I wasn't aware the Academy taught philosophy alongside combat training. Vex High's psychic presence intensified, pressing against her mind with the force of a mental battering ram. Your species is an evolutionary accident, they projected with vicious satisfaction. Bipedal weaklings who never should have survived long enough to reach the stars. The only reason you're still alive is because stronger species allow it. That's an interesting theory, Zara acknowledged, continuing to organize her equipment with the same methodical precision. Have you considered writing a thesis on it? I'm sure the xenobiology department would find your insights illuminating. Thimel's glow shifted to an angry red. You think this is amusing? You think you can mock us? Mock you? Zara finally straightened to her full height, which brought her roughly to chest level with the shortest of her tormentors. I wouldn't dream of it. That would require taking you seriously, and frankly, I have better things to do with my time. The casual dismissal was the final straw. 3 months of frustrated harassment, 3 months of watching their target refuse to break, 3 months of having their superiority questioned by the most inferior species in the galaxy. Something had to be done about this situation, and subtle approaches had clearly failed. Enough, Korat snarled, raising one massive fist. Time for a practical demonstration of the natural order. What happened next would be debated in academy halls for years to come, analyzed in tactical studies courses, and serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of assumptions. But in the moment, it unfolded with the simple inevitability of physics. Koratha's fist descended with enough force to crush steel, aimed directly at Zara's apparently fragile human skull. It was a straightforward approach, overwhelming force applied with maximum prejudice. The sort of tactic that had served his species well for millennia. Zara moved. Not the desperate scramble of prey fleeing a predator, but the fluid motion of someone who had spent considerable time thinking about how to hurt people efficiently. She stepped inside Koratha's reach, letting his massive fist whistle past her ear, and drove her elbow into his solar plexus with surgical precision. The crystalline hide that could deflect plasma fire apparently did nothing against properly applied leverage. Korath doubled over with a sound like breaking glass, his entire nervous system suddenly very interested in informing him that something had gone terribly wrong. Vex High reacted with the speed of thought, literally, since their psychic abilities operated at near-light speed. Mental talons lashed out, seeking to overwhelm Zara's consciousness with pure agony, the sort of psychic assault that had incapacitated dozens of opponents in previous encounters. They encountered something unexpected. Human minds, it turned out, were not constructed like other species' mental architecture. Where most beings possessed neat, organized thought patterns that could be easily disrupted, human consciousness resembled a particularly chaotic storm system. Attempting to assault it psychically was like trying to punch a hurricane, technically possible, but inadvisable for the puncher's long-term health. The psychic feedback sent Vex High staggering backward, their compound eyes wide with shock and no small amount of terror. They had just discovered that human minds were not only resistant to psychic attack, but actively hostile to psychic intrusion. Thymau, witnessing the rapid incapacitation of their companions, decided that energy manipulation was the answer. They began gathering power, their crystalline form blazing with enough stored energy to level a small building. This would end the fight quickly and decisively, which was exactly what Zara had been counting on. She moved again, not away from Thymau but directly toward them, closing the distance with a sort of controlled aggression that suggested considerable familiarity with violence. As Thymau released their stored energy in a devastating blast, Zara was already inside their guard, one hand gripping their crystalline arm while the other struck a very specific point on their torso. The energy discharge, instead of incinerating its target, followed the path of least resistance, directly through Thymel's own crystalline structure. The resulting feedback loop turned them into an impromptu light show that would have been beautiful if it weren't so obviously painful. In the space of perhaps 15 seconds, 3 of the Academy's most dangerous students had been reduced to groaning heaps on the storage room floor. Their targets stood over them, barely breathing hard, her expression still carrying that same polite disinterest. "You know," she said conversationally, "you really should have done your research." Korath, still struggling to remember how breathing worked, managed a strangled "what?" "Research," Zara repeated patiently. "Basic intelligence gathering. It's considered good practice before engaging an unknown opponent." She crouched down to his level, her green eyes reflecting a disturbing amount of amusement. "For instance, you might have discovered that while humans are indeed classified as Class D species, that classification is based on average physical capabilities, not individual training or experience." Vex High attempted to probe her mind again, seeking some explanation for what had just occurred. They encountered the same chaotic storm system as before, but this time they caught a glimpse of something that made their blood run cold. Memories of violence, systematic and professional, the sort of experience that came from years of specialized training. "You might also have learned," Zara continued, "that humans have a rather extensive military history. We've been perfecting the art of killing each other for thousands of years, and we've gotten quite good at it. Some of us have even made it our profession." Thymel's glow had faded to a barely perceptible flicker. "Impossible," they whispered. "Humans are support personnel. Weak. Fragile." "On average, yes," Zara agreed. "But averages can be misleading. For example, the average human has never seen combat. They've never learned to kill efficiently or how to turn an opponent's strengths into weaknesses. They've never spent years training in environments specifically designed to produce the most dangerous individuals their species can create." She stood, brushing dust from her uniform with the same methodical precision she applied to everything else. "I am not the average human." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor outside, growing louder with each second. Academy security, drawn by the energy discharges and psychic disturbances, was finally arriving to investigate. They would find 3 elite combat students in need of medical attention and 1 human who appeared completely unharmed. Professor Greetal arrived first, his multiple eyes taking in the scene with the sort of professional assessment that came from decades of military experience. Behind him came Medical Officer Hellenth, Combat Instructor Corval, and half a dozen security personnel, all of whom stopped dead when they saw the tableau before them. "What happened, eh?" Greetal demanded, his translator working overtime to convey his confusion. "Training accident," Zara replied with the same polite disinterest she had maintained throughout the encounter. "These gentlemen were demonstrating advanced combat techniques, and things got a bit out of hand." Korath attempted to contradict this obviously false statement, but discovered that his respiratory system was still sorting out its priorities. Vex High tried to project the truth directly into the professor's mind, but found their psychic abilities were experiencing technical difficulties. Thymel simply glowed weakly, like a dying glow stick. Medical Officer Hellenth began scanning the 3 casualties with professional efficiency, while Professor Greetal turned his attention to the only conscious, uninjured individual present. "Miss Hendricks," he said slowly, "perhaps you could provide more details about this training accident." "Certainly," Zara replied. "Korath was demonstrating proper striking techniques when he suffered what appeared to be a muscle spasm. Vex High attempted a psychic diagnostic and experienced some sort of feedback loop. Thymel tried to provide assistance with energy manipulation and had a containment failure. I provided basic first aid, but they should probably be examined by qualified medical personnel." It was complete nonsense, of course. Every being present knew it was complete nonsense. But it was the sort of complete nonsense that would look good in an official report, and sometimes that was more important than actual truth. Professor Greetal studied Zara with renewed interest. In all his years at the academy, he had never seen 3 elite students simultaneously disabled by training accidents, while a Class D species remained completely unharmed. It suggested possibilities that the Academy's classification system had never considered. "Miss Hendricks," he said carefully, "your file indicates you completed basic military service before applying to the Academy." "That's correct, sir. It's rather sparse on details. Military records often are, so." Professor Greetal had been in the military long enough to recognize the sort of carefully neutral responses that suggested classified operations and need-to-know restrictions. He was beginning to suspect that Zara Hendricks' admission to advanced combat training had not been a bureaucratic error after all. I see, he said. Well, I believe this incident warrants a thorough review. Security footage, medical reports, witness statements. We'll want to understand exactly how these training accidents occurred. Of course, sir, Zara replied. I'm happy to cooperate with any investigation. As medical personnel loaded the 3 casualties onto transport gurneys, Professor Greetal found himself reconsidering everything he thought he knew about human capabilities. The galaxy's military academies had been training warriors for thousands of years, and in all that time, no Class D species had ever single-handedly defeated 3 elite combat students. Unless, of course, they weren't actually Class D. The classification system had been designed around species averages, statistical models that described typical capabilities for typical individuals. But what if some individuals weren't typical? What if some species produced outliers so far beyond the norm that the entire classification system became meaningless? Word of the incident spread through the academy with the speed of gossip, which was significantly faster than light-speed communication. Within hours, every student knew that something extraordinary had happened in Storage Bay 7. The details varied depending on who was telling the story, but the core facts remained consistent. 3 elite warriors had been hospitalized after an encounter with the Academy's only human student. The official investigation, when it finally concluded, determined that the injuries had indeed resulted from training accidents. Korath had suffered a muscle spasm during strength demonstrations. Vexai had experienced psychic feedback during routine mental exercises. Thimal had encountered an energy containment failure during basic manipulation drills. All unfortunate accidents that could happen to anyone. The fact that these accidents had occurred simultaneously in the presence of the same individual was noted but not officially considered suspicious. After all, correlation was not causation, and sometimes coincidences were simply coincidences. But in the weeks that followed, something changed in the Academy's social dynamic. Students who had previously ignored or mocked Zara now gave her a wide berth, their expressions mixing curiosity with something that might have been respect or might have been fear. Instructors began paying closer attention to her performance, noting details they had previously overlooked. And in the classified sections of her personnel file, new information began to appear. Service records that had been sealed under various security classifications. Training certifications from programs that officially didn't exist. Performance evaluations that used terms like exceptional, lethal, and asset to be protected at all costs. The galaxy, it seemed, had seriously underestimated humanity's capacity for producing dangerous individuals. 3 months later, when Korath, Vexai, and Thimal finally returned to active training, they maintained a respectful distance from their human classmate. They had learned an important lesson about assumptions, though they would never admit it publicly. The galaxy was full of surprises, and sometimes the most dangerous predators came in the most unexpected packages. Zara continued her studies with the same methodical precision she had always displayed, seemingly unaware of her changed status within the Academy's social hierarchy. She completed her assignments, attended her classes, and maintained her polite but distant demeanor. To all external appearances, she remained exactly what she had always been, a perfectly ordinary human student who somehow found herself in extraordinary circumstances. Which was, Professor Greetal reflected as he watched her demolish a training dummy with surgical precision, exactly what made her so extraordinarily dangerous. The Nexus Combat Academy had been founded on the principle that the galaxy's various species could learn to fight together instead of fighting each other. It was a noble goal, built on the foundation of mutual understanding and respect. But perhaps, the professor thought, they had been approaching the problem from the wrong direction. Perhaps the key to galactic peace wasn't teaching predators to cooperate with prey. Perhaps it was learning to recognize that in the vast ecosystem of the galaxy, the definitions of predator and prey were far more fluid than anyone had imagined. And sometimes, just sometimes, the most dangerous hunters were the ones everyone assumed were harmless. After all, humans hadn't reached the stars by being fragile. They had reached the stars by being survivors, adapters, and when necessary, extremely efficient killers. The galaxy was just beginning to understand what that actually meant. But that, as they say, is a lesson for another day.